Okay, good Monday afternoon. That's a picture of the Trump Tower on the Chicago River in Chicago. Recent trip I took on Amtrak, and there's another picture of it with a different camera. And that's HRC. There's a car in the way. I'm going to talk about HRC a little bit, and I'm going to talk about this mailing I got from Planned Parenthood, and yeah. They sent me a membership card and a letter which talks about it talks mainly about abortion, abortion rights, which I've but talks about objecting to the fact there are only two sexes and the threat to gender affirming care. For adults that may be okay, but for minors that's a real problem. And yeah, I don't give up my own private activity or voice just to join an organization and follow them and then work for them and support everything they say and become their ally. I just don't do things that way. And that's gotten to be a problem. Um, and I just wanted to talk about that today a little bit. Um, the main thing been most concerned about, as I have been in several recent posts, is this whole idea of self-declared gender identity being recognized as having being recognized as needing a public label and having the same level of sex or trying to be used even to override sex. And one of the things when you unpack this, you start getting to running around in circles and you're not quite sure what they're really getting after other than oppressor versus oppressed, which is true. Gender, and I was not a non-conforming kid myself when I was growing up, and I eventually had to deal with having to conform to some of the expectations. I had a little more support than maybe I could earn. Um, but excuse me. But this is kind of a Marxist kind of idea. People who are attractive according to the norms for their biological sex as adults have an advantage. Those who are less attractive and conform less in their behavior and abilities and appearance to their biological sex are put at a disadvantage normally. And so in a way, gender identity even things out. It's sort of a Marxist identity, and it goes along with, as Carlin Borisenko has been saying a lot on her channel, in her spying on the left and everything, an attempt to get rid of biological sex, to get rid of the family. Um, Completely. The nuclear family, get rid of private kitchens, get rid of everything. I'm not sure how the world population continues. But gay men, particularly, with our emphasis on upward affiliation, finding a partner who is more ideally male than we are. That's a big part of the male gay community. That's going on for decades. Um, but if you stop and think about it, if everybody did only that, we would be sliding back to fascism, because nobody would be valued unless they proved they could make it, prove they were fit enough to be valued by other people. So in that line of thinking, we would start finding authoritarianism and even maybe the Trumpism now some appealing some people. Um, if you're going to be an ally, of a group of whether it's Planned Parenthood or HRC, you know, or any other group, you're supposed to participate actively, including their political causes, be able to march in demonstrations, be able to knock on doors, all of this kind of thing, raise money for them, not for what you think. And you're supposed to bond to members of the group psychologically and with other people and look at things on the basis of who is oppressed and who is the oppressor, you know. Um, but there, and I understand that people who are gender non-conforming people, particularly kids, certainly could be considered oppressed, but they're not actually an identity, they're not actually an immutable identity group in the sense that a race is, or members of an ethnicity are, or a country, you know, or even you could say religion. People are born into a religion essentially, generally. And they, including myself, you know, I'm a person that had certain developmental difficulties. It wasn't my fault. It may have been partly because of the measles or something like that, but um, it, it isn't something that entitles me to have an identity label by itself. And it's a developmental issue, you know, and the consequences were, I was an only child, which is atypical for, but my parents will not have a lineage. So yeah, there were consequences for other people they might have been counting on. But the biggest concern, particularly specifically, of course, is supporting gender affirming care for minors who claim to be um, complain to be, you know, to be dysphoric, or who say they feel like they're the other sex, or non-binary or something. And as you know, in Europe, you know, this was going on a lot, particularly in England with Tavistock and so forth. And then in Europe and England and the other countries, they backed away from the original Dutch protocol in the 90s, saying it wasn't conclusive enough that it really benefited the kids, and that the risk of giving puberty blockers, even if you stop them later, to how the person will do as an adult, we haven't really seriously taken the risk seriously enough, and don't really know what would happen. So it's more acceptable when you're dealing with minors to at most have a trial, a very carefully supervised trial, and follow these people for 2 or 3 decades to see how they do as adults. And then not only allow this kind of care in the case of a carefully supervised trial, which is what I would have. That kind of an idea I can support. However, in the United States, the American Psychological Association and the American Medical Association still support gender affirming care for minors in some cases, even when there is less certainty about how they'll do as adults. They're more the American College of Pediatrics has backed down somewhat. Um, one of the things is that, of course, without allowing any meaningful, uh, you're not allowing gender affirming care or even blockers at all in early adolescence and so forth, then everything else kind of falls apart. If you're going to teach gender identity the way it's been taught in some public schools and many systems in the past few years, and then not allow any physical changes at all, then you are going to have a problem when they're in senior high school for the with bathrooms and locker rooms and so forth. And there have been problems like in Loudoun County, Virginia, and so forth. There have been some serious issues. And so the whole rest of the idea sort of starts to fall apart because you can't really follow through with it. And it gets back more to just believing in it gets more back to just believing in um, the idea of gender identity, which NIH in one of its documents that I looked up considers to be something that's experienced. Um, so that's what it is. It's something that you may experience. But if it doesn't contradict your biological sex, you're not going to be aware of it. Now, Paul Rosenfels, remember I've talked about um, his book many times. Uh, I think I showed you the letter I got too from Grand America and the banner and the membership card. I think I showed you that. Um, Paul Rosenfels used to say, yeah, you can have a feminine polarity and still be a male and still be a man, and you can actually be a heterosexual man and marry a masculine woman. A woman has a masculine personality in his terminology. But you just still don't need an external label for it. It's simply your own personal growth. But that would mean if you have a polarity, it would mean to me that you experience something. You're aware that if you're a feminine man in his way of thinking, you're more concerned about truth than you are about having power. You're more about um, the truth behind something rather than making people be loyal to you or being aggressive. But then you get all these gradations well, we teach people to be a man too. You don't have to always force people to do things using force or demanding loyalty the way Trump does, undermining the rule of law even. It's not the way to prove that you're a man. So it gets to be very ambiguous what polarity really means and how you're really going to behave. I would want to be known for the things I wrote and the things I did. Um, but those aren't particularly gendered and they don't need to have a pronoun attached to them or a gender label attached to them. They're just what I did. They're descriptive, but they don't really identify me. The only way I should be identified is as a male, like on my driver's license or passport. Um, so, one of the questions is where does gender identity even come from? And there's a website. I'll give it in the notes that traces the history of it. But it seems like it's more just a tradition to recognize it as meaning something, meaning what you experience that evolved over time. The Yogartha principles in 2007 claimed that anybody should be able to identify any way they want. Uh, but it seems like it's always been ambiguous. It's gotten into our legal system without ever having a precise definition. John Money may have been part of it in the past and several other people. There is also the question that, yes, NIH has found, published some papers reporting there are differences that you can find between uh, trans people and not cis people, if you want to call them that, in certain parts of the brain. And there may be a possible problem with some young children that the central nervous system index that the parts of your body, doesn't recognize the anatomy properly, and that they might feel like they should have had a different anatomy. That's something I've read on Quora, but I haven't seen much about it in the NIH or in the literature. But it would seem like we need, if you want to pursue the idea of legal recognition for this, you need a lot more substance in the medicine of actually knowing what's going on in the brain and the central nervous system. What's happened instead is that to protect the whole civil rights for everyone, including gay people, um, the HRC and other people have sort of insisted that gender identity is a concept not be questioned at all, that everything else sort of depends on accepting it. Um, and then this gets on to reinforce it, to changing other people's habits, asking everyone to announce their pronouns, changing the meanings of words, changing words in writing, not using referring to men and women, but referring to birthing persons or this kind of thing. It's all this very radical stuff, which of course sounds like nonsense to most of us. And of course, the Equality Act, which HRC would support. It would be based on would consider gender identity, which sometimes can conflict with sexual orientation. Because sexual orientation is attraction to a person based on their biological sex. Although Paul Rosenfeld used to say people should be attracted to people based on polarity. He actually said that back in the 70s. So that's a little bit nebulous, I think. Um, I know in my own personal life, I just wasn't aware. I knew that there were a few cases of people being canceled over this back in 2017, 2018. Tim Pool would talk about it sometimes. Um, but like Fairfax County, I had been a substitute teacher back in the 2000s, and I still, why I stopped, that's another story, but maybe distantly related. But in as late as 2019, before the pandemic, I went to their July picnic. And there'd be about 100 people there. There'd be gay students and gay teachers, and there'd be a few people that were obviously trans, and 3 or 4. I guess they were over 18. One or two of them looked like they had. I didn't turn off. I didn't turn off my spam. Well, that's going to be a sound effect. I forgot to turn that. Um, one of the one of the in 2022, when I went back to 2022 after the pandemic with um, the same kind of event, it completely changed, and I was questioning things, and they practically drove me out of the room. So I know it changed the awareness up front. Wasn't really very strong until after the pandemic, even though it had been going on for maybe eh, maybe since about 2015, it may even be before that, but we weren't hearing about it except very occasionally in the media before the pandemic at all. I didn't pay very much attention to it when I was using Blogger. It seemed like it was a very small problem. And it seemed like to me, even with the misgendering policies on Twitter, the old Twitter, it seemed I was under the impression when people were trans is that they were adults and they transitioned. And then if you were transitioned fully, it didn't mean the bathroom wasn't a problem. But now we hear more people want to claim, because they can't afford transitioning, they want to claim the other gender identity or even a non-binary identity with no transition and be able to use whatever facilities you want and play in the sport, women's sports, and all these other distractions. So what it seems like is what people are asking for now seems very extreme. And I wasn't aware of how extreme this had become until after the pandemic, as I say. There were just hints of it before. And people may say the right is exaggerating it, and maybe they are, because there is not very many people really are actually getting puberty blockers now. In Virginia, in the DC area, it seems like the actual incident is very low, but yet they're still teaching gender identity in lower grades in the schools and allowing social transitioning sometimes, and sometimes without parents knowing. And I'm not sure what's going to happen as they grow older if they don't transition. How are they really going to function in the way they want to, even in sports or something? I do think there are a lot of things you can do. When I was in middle school, which started in seventh grade, went seventh and ninth grade when I went to school, you boys took shop and girls took home ec. And so, yeah, both boys and girls should take both courses, I think. You should make the curriculum the same. There are a lot of things you should do to make it more the same that we weren't doing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think schools schools should teach biology sooner, maybe in middle school, and should teach something about the Constitution, teach about the Supreme Court, and teach about the 2003 Lawrence decision and 2015 Obergefell. And by the way, with Obergefell, we were actually changing the meaning of the word marriage to take away the importance of the potential for procreation. And that's a very sensitive issue in some parts of the world where the birth rate is a political issue, like Hungary and so forth. And I know that we had that wound up having Pride Budapest after all, despite Orban and everything. But one of the things that that HRC says, and I think Planned Parenthood is going to say, and by the way, did I mention, abortion? Planned Parenthood, I always thought of as mostly about being pro-choice. And personally, Roe wasn't that far off. Personally, I don't think the law should prohibit abortion until the baby could be conscious, which is, as best we know, is about 12 or 13 weeks. Then the law should be a lot stricter. But I don't think there should be a problem with taking it the morning after pill. Certainly not with anything that before the egg implants and so forth. I don't think that. I think the right has carried the right to life with the extremely young unborn to quite an extreme, which I don't think is morally necessary. So I'm actually with Planned Parenthood on that up to a point. I wanted to say that. The other thing is whether gay men specifically should accept being referred to as part of GLBTQ people when the needs for gay men, and gay women too, lesbians, and we get into the turf issue and everything, were just to be left alone mostly in the past. Have their spaces, not be discriminated against, but they weren't trying to impose on anyone. But then I think the two things in the past, of course, were the public health issue back in the 1980s with the AIDS epidemic. And of course, COVID was exactly the opposite as a public health. The way it worked was it attacked, and the way it behaved was exactly the 180 degrees the opposite of what AIDS was. And gay men were kind of left, people who lived alone or didn't get COVID very much. One of the, I would be concerned if Trump hasn't, and Vance don't seem to have had a problem with gay people particularly, except some of the things like Vance is talking about different kinds of citizenship if your family was here, blood and soil. So that sounds rather inappropriate. Um, but if we actually were the next target, then conceivably and then a future administration would go after the availability of PREP. There was a recent court ruling, HRC there. I'll give you the link. Um, which the Supreme Court recently protected affordable access to PREP. Um, so, but somebody could take that away, or they could try to make PREP illegal for adults, just like they could try to make gender affirming care illegal for everybody someday. So I can't deny that there is a risk of a slippery slope. I can't completely deny that. Um, and um, so, but what's important to me is my sort of own fitness to be here and my keeping my own voice, not surrendering it to organizations and supporting everything they want, which has led to very extreme results in the case of the trans issue. So that again is the reaction I had to getting this mailer recently from even a membership card showing um, where was that uh, that membership card, which I might have been a member one time before, but I don't remember ever asking for that. So I was rather taken back by that. But that's kind of what I have. There's danger, but yet um, the issues, the issues right now for ordinary gay people and for trans people are quite different in practice than to me and to most gay people what what trans activists want. Although not a lot of trans people are fine. Brianna Wu and so forth are fine and reasonable. Um, and the things they say and don't want all this, but what the trans activists want seem us to join in with these very extreme demands on the idea that you have to win completely and overturn the system completely, or else we'll go back to fascism. But I do get the point that this upward affiliation and wanting everyone to, I do to be perfect, that you're associated with is dangerous too. The way that if people in my position are sort of expected to do something for those that are less well off because it was done for me, and I haven't exactly done that. I do get that. And so the demand, the needs of some people have become more and more extreme as time has gone by, and you're seeing it in a lot of areas. So that's what I had for today, and I do thank you for listening.